Welcome to the Volpe Report podcast, the state's premier public affairs show dedicated to the topics that matter most to Pennsylvanians. I'm your host, Chuck Volpe. Join us now as we speak to this week's guest.
The following half-hour show is a paid political program and is not endorsed by this station, management, or staff.
The following program is brought to you by Excalibur Insurance Management Services.
We are pleased to welcome our special guest today. That is our very own Pennsylvania United States Senator Dave McCormick. As Dave has been a guest many times in this show, I'm sure you remember back to his first run for U.S. Senate back in 2022. I know you've heard his background before, so I'll give you the Cliff Notes version this time around. Dave was born in Pittsburgh, but he spent most of his formative years growing up in Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania, where his father, James, was president of Bloomsburg University, as well as served as chancellor of the Pennsylvania System of Higher Education. Dave received a coveted appointment to the West Point Military Academy, where he graduated with a degree in mechanical engineering. He also was a four-time letterman and co-captain of the Army wrestling team. Upon graduation, Dave entered the U.S. Army, becoming an honor graduate of the Airborne Ranger School. He then joined the historically famous 82nd Airborne Division. He was part of the first wave sent to Iraq for the Gulf War. Dave became the XO of a combat engineering company tasked with the unenviable task of clearing minefields and destroying enemy munitions, and in the process, received the coveted Bronze Star for valor in combat. Upon completion of his military service, Dave resumed his education, earning his doctorate degree from Princeton in international relations. Before becoming our United States Senator, Dave had a public service record, serving the administration of George W. Bush, where he served as Undersecretary of the Treasury and was the principal advisor to Treasury Secretary Henry Paulson. Dave would then become a Deputy National Security Advisor for International Economic Policy. On today's show, we will discuss his first 100 days in the Senate, the sad state of relations and partisanship in Congress, as well as key legislation he has sponsored to deal with the scourge of fentanyl, which claimed the lives of 4,000 Pennsylvanians last year alone.
This is the Volpe Report, a weekly news and political interview show examining the latest local, state, and national issues with Chuck Volpe. Insightful, informative, controversial. The area's premier political talk show, the Volpe Report.
Dave, welcome to the Volpe Report.
Hey, great to be with you, Chuck. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. And as we were just all like moments ago off camera laughing, you've been in that chair a number of times. You've been on Zoom a number of times. You've become a regular guest, and all the way back to the campaign of 2022. Remember it well. And I said, from whence you came. I mean, then you were just a regular citizen and a businessman and all that. And you sit here now as a United States Senator, actually in studio. We're glad to have you. And I think the first subject matter, before we get to all the important stuff we need to talk about in Washington, you were the subject of an article this week in one of our newspapers of general circulation. It was I'll call it a hit piece. It was an opinion piece. It wasn't straight reporting. About a protest rally that had occurred at your Scranton headquarters. The writer referred to you as Chicken Dave because you didn't apparently show up to your office for a protest that you had no knowledge was taking place.
Right.
I don't know how you can back up from a fight, that way if you don't know about it, right? So, but at any rate, the issues that were raised, and I'm glad we have you here to debunk them. And I told you a little background. United States congressmen, both from this region, in this media market, Dan Buser and Rob Bresnahan, have both been subject. This is shocking to me. They just got sworn in. I was at yours in early January. They get sworn in early January, and the Democratic super PAC Dark Money is attacking them in hit pieces, how they're going to take away your Medicare, Medicaid, they're going to take away your Social Security. Garbage, lies. And I actually said to Rob on this show, I said, Rob, well, first of all, really? It's 2 years till the next election. They're already hitting you. But on that particular piece, and of course, I have, in promoting this show, advertised that, following the issue carefully, what cuts are being made. And it's not to just Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. It's across the entire spectrum of the government. President Trump ran very clearly with an overwhelming mandate by the voters to cut fraud, waste, and abuse. Well, fraud, waste, and abuse is prevalent in the Medicare, Medicaid program. It's prevalent in Social Security. And before I turn it over, I'll just give, as I did in my newspaper ads, a couple of, for instances. Like, why is Medicaid a health program, right, to cover health costs? They were paying for food, transportation, and housing. I'm pretty sure that's not what Medicaid is supposed to be used for. So, and then, of course, President Trump addressed, as you sat in that room, in his, what I call the State of the Union, people that would have to have been 250 years old are still getting Social Security checks. So I think it's clear to me the fraud, waste, and abuse and what's going to get cut from those essential programs are not their essential benefits, but the waste, fraud, and abuse. So take it from there.
Well, there's a lot there. Good to be with you, Chuck, and thanks for having me on the show and the opportunity. And you were saying what it's different now to being a senator, from before till now. And I think the big difference is now when my wife says take out the garbage, she says, Senator, take out the garbage. It hasn't changed things much. But first 10 weeks in office. And what an honor and a privilege to represent the people of Pennsylvania. I feel absolutely a great honor to be the senator from Pennsylvania. I think I mentioned this earlier. I'm the 54th senator from Pennsylvania elected, and I'm the 9th senator in history from West Point. And so to be representing Pennsylvania is an honor at any moment, but at this moment in particular, because President Trump ran on a mandate for change. Dramatic change of getting our spending under control, closing the border, stopping the flow of fentanyl. This was a change agenda. And we're 10 weeks into it, and there's an enormous amount of progress on that agenda. And I think what you're seeing, you saw this when his made his joint address to Congress, that the Democratic Party is really in disarray and does not have a response to that agenda. President Trump's doing just what he said he would do in the campaign, and the Democrats are responding with all sorts of lies and misdirection. And that's what's happening in the case of Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. Just to put this in perspective, my dad's 87. He lives in Enola, outside of Harrisburg. During the campaign, he called me and said, listen, you're great. I think you'd be a good senator. But if you cut Social Security, I'm not voting for you. So just to put this in perspective.
It's embarrassing for the Democrats.
It's embarrassing.
Really?
Right. It's embarrassing. But what President Trump ran on, what I ran on, we said the same thing, and I believe this individually, is we have to protect Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid benefits. We're not in the business of taking any benefits away. What is clear is that we have a $34 trillion debt. We have a $2 trillion deficit every year. We spend $6 trillion. We bring in $4 trillion. That's unsustainable. We're on a path to destroying our country for our kids. So we've got to rear in the spending, and we've got to get these bureaucracies out of control. And as you said, the Government Accountability Office, which is a nonpartisan a group that assesses policies, has estimated there could be $500 billion of waste, fraud, and abuse. And that is what the focus will be across the federal government. And we see with the programs that the DOGE effort is showing that there's a lot of spending taking place that is either waste, fraud, and abuse, or certainly inconsistent with what the taxpayers would have agreed to. In the case of Medicaid, it's grown by 30% in the last 4 years under the Biden administration. This is something like $250 billion of annual new spending. So there's waste, fraud, and abuse there. There's waste, fraud, and abuse everywhere. President Trump has said, and I support him, that we're not going to cut the benefits.
Right. Well, that's excellent. So we debunked that, and it's great to have a U.S. Senator here to debunk it in studio, because I've been debunking it and yelling about it. Now let me turn to something. You were in the area today, and I was proud to attend a business roundtable. It was standing room only. You had in a dining room at one of the area clubs, they were literally packed 4 deep. You had most of our captains of industry, our business leaders. You had some of our top unions, trade unions, people that work for a living. You had people from the energy sector. You had a large swath from finance and banking talking about economic development in Pennsylvania, talking about energy in Pennsylvania. And so get in a little bit about, you answered, obviously, were the subject of many questions directed at you. And one of the themes I got from this is you sit on the Energy Committee, so talk about your plans there. But secondarily, that one of the other things that came clear is that with all this new jobs and development, infrastructure with Rob Bresnahan, who sits on the Highway and Infrastructure Committee, there are going to be a lot of development in Pennsylvania and economic development. So talk a little bit about that.
Well, this is what, in many ways, the election was about: jobs, jobs, jobs. How do we create opportunity for all Pennsylvanians? Republicans, Democrats, like this. I'm elected to represent every single Pennsylvanian. About 60% of Pennsylvanians live paycheck to paycheck. And so the election was about how to make the economy better, how to get control of inflation, how to unlock energy, because we're so blessed across Pennsylvania. We're the second largest natural gas producer in the country, the fourth largest in the world. How do we get control of the border and stop the fentanyl that's flowing into this community and many others? That's what the election was all about. And the driver of the American dream and economic opportunity for everybody is new jobs. And so what are we doing about new jobs? Well, the Trump administration has said from day one, they're going to have a dramatic reduction of regulation. That's going to be fantastic for all businesses, particularly small businesses. Small businesses are the driver of jobs. About 80% of new jobs come from small businesses. The second thing is the Trump administration said they're going to do, and I'm going to be able to help this a lot. I'm on the Energy Committee. I asked for that. And I'm also the chair of the subcommittee on energy. We need to have permitting reform. We need to have a number of things that make it much easier to drill, have pipeline permitting, have an offshore LNG export facility off the Delaware River. These are things that will change Pennsylvania's future. The third thing we need to do is have focus on skilled training. I grew up, my dad was the president of Bloomsburg State College. I grew up thinking that the only path to the American dream was you go to college. I don't think that anymore at all. I've spent the last decades and the last couple years on 500 campaign stops across Pennsylvania. There are enormous opportunities for skilled labor. We don't have enough skilled workers to fill the jobs that we have. So welders, I was in Lancaster this morning at Tech Central. They have training for welders, they have training for HVAC, they have training for electricians. These jobs are great paying jobs. You can have a career, you can have a great middle class existence, and the American dream is in reach. So we need to double down on that. And one of the things that I talked about earlier today with some folks was how you adjust the GI Bill. I took advantage of the GI Bill coming out of the Army, how you adjust that to be able to have it support skilled workers, not just four-year education. So there's an agenda that's going to be great for Pennsylvania. The last thing, of course, is those energy jobs are great not only for the energy workers that benefit, but there's a whole industry that grows up around supporting energy, whether it's hotels or trucks or mechanics or a whole series of things that are going to make this economy much more vibrant. That's the agenda President Trump ran on. That's the agenda I ran on, and that's what we're focused on.
Yeah. One of the things, Senator, I'm joining your wife now, it's Senator instead of Dave anymore, is that I sit here in amazement. I follow politics, as you know, almost professionally. And as I'm following it, it's been amazing and offensive to me about the National Democratic Party, my former party of 45 years, that, I quipped at one point, someone needs to read Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, Hakeem Jeffries, the story of the little boy who cried wolf.
Yeah.
Because, they've called Republicans generally, and President Trump specifically, basically every name in the book. And so they tried fascist, they tried Nazi. God, I don't know where you go from Adolf Hitler. Right. There's not much place to go. And the American people gave them the middle finger and said, shut up. We don't believe in your radical policies to fundamentally change this country. You've destroyed our economy. You've destroyed our energy production. You've let illegal terrorists come across our border. Enough.
Yeah.
And so all that failed. So as soon as you get sworn in, and shortly thereafter President Trump gets sworn in, it was weekly a new soundbite they started with constitutional crisis. Why? Because someone in the executive branch was actually taking back control for the American people with their mandate. What they're doing to poor Elon Musk, they're blowing up his cars and they're firebombing his dealerships and all that. You know, the party that, the January 6th, terrible thing. You know, well, of course, American people are seeing the party of violence, you know, to want to radically and fundamentally change our country. So as you sit in a front row seat in the, to me, one of the oldest deliberative bodies in the world, I was often told the most exclusive club in the world, you now sit. Give me your view from inside the beast of the president's efforts to clear the swamp. He's actually doing what he said, and the role you're going to play in the Senate.
Well, first of all, the thing I really appreciate about what President Trump's doing, and I'd like to put myself in the same category, is he's doing exactly what he said he was going to do. I would ask anybody to point to anything President Trump's doing that's inconsistent with what he promised. This is exactly what he ran on. It's what he got elected on. And it's the same thing for me. So in my office, I have a whiteboard, and I have the top 10 things I promised written down. And I have listed next to them the things we're doing. So, for example, I said over and over again, I ran commercials on it, we've got to stop the flow of fentanyl. That's critical to Pennsylvania. We lost 4,000 people. So I introduced new legislation. That new legislation is focused on fentanyl, creates a joint task force of law enforcement, all the different bodies, accountability, focus, resources to stop this flow. You know who the co-sponsor was? John Fetterman.
Democratic
right?
United States Senator from Pennsylvania.
Exactly. You know who the other co-sponsor was? Chris Coons, Democratic Senator from Delaware. Right? So we have good ideas. We have promises we made, and that's what I'm moving forward on. That's what President Trump's moving forward on. In the end, that's what this entire thing was about. It was getting things done on behalf of Pennsylvanians, on behalf of Americans, to get the country moving in the right direction. Now, the Democrats, I think, have lost their way. The coalition that President Trump built and that I built and that I took advantage of had lots of Democrats in it. It had a very significant uptick in Hispanic voters, in African-American voters, in the labor unions and the trade unions that supported me, in the Jewish community. Traditional groups that had been more Democrat came the way of President Trump, came the way of my campaign, because we promised to fix these problems, and that's what we need to do. And I think the Democrats, I don't want to psychoanalyze them, but I think they haven't found an answer to why that coalition's moved in our direction. And and it's gone from loss of direction to what I think the right word is bankruptcy. And the reason I would say bankruptcy is I sat in that chamber for the president's address to Congress, and he said things like, let's recognize this young man who survived cancer, and we're going to make him an honorary member of the Secret Service. The Democrats sat. They put up their small signs. Said, let's recognize Corey Compertore's widow, the man who I was there in Butler, who threw himself on his family to protect them.
And laid down his life.
Laid down his life. The Democrats can't stand. Mark Fogel, who my first promise to his mom at the Butler rally at the age of 95, I said, listen, I'm going to do my part to try to get him home. President Trump right there, I'm going to do my part to try to get her home. 22 days later in the Trump administration, Mark Fogel, I'm there, Dina and my wife and I are there. He walks into the White House. He's crying like to be an American soul, in the White House. If you can't stand as a Democrat and applaud that, that's above partisan politics. So that's why I think you're seeing these attacks constantly, because they don't have the answer for how they're going to solve America's problems. And I actually hope they find it, because America's healthiest when we have two healthy parties that can compete for ideas. I don't think it's a good thing that the Democratic Party has lost its way, but I hope they find their way. And in the meantime, I think Republicans need to deliver on the promise. In the end, we got to get a hold of inflation. We got to close the border. We got to stop fentanyl. We got to unlock energy. We got to bring law and order to our cities. If we do that, every single Pennsylvanian is going to be happy about it.
But I talked about the Democratic lies and dissembling and all of that. Well, you remind me in those last words there, like they're already like, well, they haven't cured inflation yet. I didn't know you can cure the entire economy of the largest economy in the world in 4 weeks.
Right.
They spent 4 years digging that hole and
Right.
kept digging, our economic disaster. So again, back to the disingenuousness, David, a couple of editorial comments. First is, I remember, because I'm an old guy now, I go back to the 60s, and, while other parties out of power and out of the White House would find their legitimate disagreements with the incumbents and who had the power, I had a sense they were still all cheering for America.
Yeah.
They were cheering for America to succeed. You don't have to like Donald Trump. You should hope he's successful because that means the country is successful.
Yeah.
How do you not stand for a 13-year-old cancer survivor that he had the scars on his head? People talk about partisanship and about our country state right now. And I don't understand. America has seen them for what they are now. At what point do you get a poll that shows a 21% approval of Democrats in the Senate and House, their congressional delegation in both chambers, 21%?
Yeah.
At what point do you reboot and say, let's be American again, let's find our ways to disagree, but let's point out those differences respectfully, not blow up dealerships, not call for war, not call for taking it to the streets? I don't get it. You're sitting there like, is there any hope for bipartisanship?
I think there is. Let me be the optimist here.
I hope I need to encourage it myself.
Yeah, no, well, first of all, I think there has to be a reckoning. There was a reckoning on Election Day. There was a reckoning. The Democrats didn't think they were going to lose. They didn't think they were going to lose. They thought they were going to win. The media was saying they were going to win. And they're going through the 5 stages of grief. And they haven't come to a resolution that their situation is a result of a misguided set of policies and poor leadership that put them in a spot where a change agent in President Trump could legitimately say, I'm going to make your life radically better, and here's how. Now, President Trump and I and others have to deliver on that promise, but the contrast could not have been more clear. So they haven't taken accountability for inflation. They tried to blame it on big companies and greed. They haven't taken responsibility for what's happened as a result of the war against fossil fuels. They haven't taken responsibility for the wide open border and the fentanyl crisis. This is all somebody else's fault. Until they own, it's like in life, until you own your mistakes, until you own responsibility, it's hard to get the learning that you need to move forward. And in their party, this is true in both parties, but in their party in particular, they are hijacked by an extreme left that's 100% for the 20% issues. And so the Democrats are running scared of the ability to confront that. One of the reasons I admire Senator Fetterman, we disagree on a lot, but we agree on some, is he's willing to confront that. And I think there's going to have to be more and more Democrats who are willing to confront that radical fringe element of their party before we can get things back on track. And so that's why I have some optimism.
Well, I'm glad you do, and you've given me some, and hopefully our audience some, that there is light at the end of the tunnel. A footnote to Senator Fetterman's comment. Do you know his entire staff resigned in protest over his positions by not just falling in line? And to his credit, I remember when he was Mayor Braddock, because I'm half Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
And I remember him, and I remember his political rise, and the cutoff sweats and the hoodie, and pulling up in a Harley and all that, and the tattoos, but I always admired him. He was truly a person of the people.
Yeah.
I disagree to your point. But that was the Democratic Party I was proud at one time to be a member from. I've made clear to this audience many times, Dave, I was a John F. Kennedy Democrat.
Yeah.
And I think it's very telling. He was just a guest on my show during the election cycle. And he said, Chuck, these were his exact words. He said, Chuck, he said, my uncle and my father, if there's a Mount Rushmore on Democratic, John F. Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy, both martyred, assassinated, or beyond that hill.
Yeah.
When he says my uncle and my father would not recognize the Democratic Party of today, there's no greater indictment to me of what we're talking
Couldn't
about.
agree. My pop-up was a county commissioner in Indiana County, Democrat.
Democratic.
My dad grew up as a Democrat. No, the Democratic Party is not the Democratic Party you and I grew up with. It's not that party. It's been hijacked. And the social issues, the biological men and women's sports, that's important not because most of us wake up thinking that's our number one issue, but the fact that that's an issue that the Democratic Party has rallied around shows how far out of sync it is with the majority of Americans, particularly a guy like me that's got 6 daughters and wants to make sure they're protected in sports. So Listen, so the Democrats have their problems, but the thing I keep coming back to, and I think this is so important, we can't do the reverse problem, which is spend our time worrying about the Democrats. We have to deliver on the promises we made to Pennsylvanians in the country. And, it's a dangerous world. This idea of peace through strength and what it's going to take to rebuild our military. And by the way, some of that rebuilding should happen right here in Pennsylvania, the Philadelphia shipyard and elsewhere, to get energy dominance, to get our economy back on track, to create these great paying jobs, to bring back key industries. That's a tall order. We're on a way to doing that, but I like the ferocity with which President Trump's hitting the pavement here, because there's not a lot of time. We need to think in 2-year blocks. We have 2 years where we can deliver on that promise because we have a majority in the House and the Senate. It's still not going to be easy because there's going to be a lot of Democratic resistance. We need to deliver on the promises, and that's what we're focused on.
You're doing it, and we only have a minute or so, 2 left. I want to get back. Your first bill that you have, I call super sponsor of the bill, on fentanyl, the scourge of fentanyl. And to your point, you have developed and co-sponsored with Democrats, which is showing what you're working in a bipartisan way. But with our last minute or so, we've talked about the bill. We had 4,000 Pennsylvanians die from fentanyl overdoses last year, so it's an epidemic in Pennsylvania. What does your bill do to help alleviate the specifics?
Well, the key is that when I campaigned, I said we got to stop the flow on the border. We got to designate the cartels as terrorist groups, which Marco Rubio did. I questioned him about this when he came before Foreign Relations. But we need to coordinate law enforcement. All the different agencies, sometimes they work in silos. We need to bring them together into a joint task force that elevates this as the priority that is. It's not just 4,000 in Pennsylvania, it's 100,000 Americans last year. Just imagine it. We lost, Chuck, 50,000 people in 8 years of war at Vietnam, right? We had 2 Vietnams last year in America. Alone, right? So it brings together the focus, the resources, the accountability back to Congress. It elevates this as the national priority that it should be. President Trump's doing the same thing. This is going to help our country really tackle this the way we should. And, of the many moving moments on the campaign, and there were many times where I was teared up or thought, my God, what a country, or how lucky am I? It was sitting time and again with these fentanyl families who had lost a child to fentanyl. And the devastation of that is something that I want to stop for all Pennsylvanians. You're allowed to bring one guest to the State of the Union. My guest was Jim Ott, who's the sheriff from Blair County. He's been fighting fentanyl all his life. He lost his own boy, his own son, to fentanyl. This is something we can beat, but it's got to be a whole-of-nation strategy, and that's what my bill's trying to do.
Well, Senator, believe it or not, we're out of time. Thank you so much, Dave, for your time. And I'll leave you with this. I'd like to get you, even if it's by Zoom, because I know you're busy in Washington, later in the spring, early summer, to talk more about some of our national issues now. We have the war with Ukraine. We just didn't have time in this show. We're bombing the Houthis in Yemen. We're coming into the crosshairs, or putting them in our crosshairs, Iran. We have, obviously, the back and forth on the war in Ukraine. So,
I'm going to the Middle East in May.
Okay.
So why don't we talk after that?
You come back.
And I'll come back and give you a debrief.
That's a date. Thanks, Senator.
Thank you.
Again, we had United States Senator Dave McCormick here. We appreciate his time, and talked about a lot of the issues I'm sure many of you are wondering about yourselves. And we're thrilled to have him back after he comes back from the Middle East to update us on some of the international issues that we face as a country. We've done a pretty good job hitting the domestic stuff here. We'll be back next week. Thanks for joining us for this edition of the Volpe Report podcast. Be sure to visit our YouTube and Facebook pages for upcoming episodes. You can catch up on the Volpe Report podcast on your favorite podcast provider.